Hi there, this is Intro to Bio lecture video number 5. I believe this is the final video of this unit. Let's begin this section by talking about biochemistry. Well, you need to know a little bit of chemistry to be successful in biology. So let's begin with some terminology, and then we'll go into the major organic molecules that we're going to talk about, the biological molecules. So terminology, organic. These are a bunch of organic structures, and the commonality between them is they have carbons and they have a hydrogen in them. This is the simplest organic molecule on the planet right here. One carbon with 4 hydrogens attached to it. Each one of these bonds that holds these hydrogens to this carbon holds energy. This gas can be burned basically for fuel. All right, any of these can be burned for fuel. As a matter of fact, okay. So organic structures generally have carbon, and by definition, they're going to need at least a hydrogen in there. CO2, carbon dioxide, even though it contains carbon, it has no hydrogens in it. Carbon dioxide is not considered organic. Inorganic substances, by definition, they do not contain carbon, basically, and water is the most common inorganic substance on the planet. Hydrophilic, fancy word, and hydrophobic. Well, hydro meaning water, philic, water loving. Hydrophilic things can dissolve in water. So they love water, or they will mix or dissolve in water. So I already mentioned to you in a previous lecture that things that will dissolve in water are polar and ionic. So things that are polar or ionic are considered hydrophilic. They will dissolve in water. All right. Things that are hydrophobic, water fearing. These substances do not dissolve in water, and there is hydrophobic. Okay, so oil does not dissolve in water, it is hydrophobic. Things that are hydrophobic are generally non-polar molecules. Okay, where can they dissolve? Hydrophobic things can dissolve in things that are hydrophobic also, like oil. Monomers, polymers, what do they mean? Mono means one, poly means many. Mono, one piece. So this is one piece. This is another monomer, a second piece. Okay. You connect a bunch of these monomers, monomer, 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 and you make a polymer. Okay. Two types of reactions. The first kind of reaction, a condensation reaction, is a building up reaction. And what does that mean? Well, if you have monomer A and monomer B and they want to get connected to each other, okay, so this is how you would build some muscle in your body, for example. You would eat you would eat some protein, your body would break it down first, all right? And then you'd have all these little parts. And those little parts, your body can then build back up into the protein you need, your muscle and the tissue of your body. How does it do that? Well, your body does a condensation reaction. Condensation reaction is this. As these monomers connect to each other, the end of each monomer, on one monomer is an OH, hydroxide, on the other is a hydrogen ion. These two get broken off when they get attached. As they break off, they reattach to each other and water is released. So in a condensation reaction, water is formed, okay, and now you're forming a polymer potentially. All right. So you start out as monomers, they get connected to each other in a condensation reaction, and now you're going to begin forming a polymer. When this happens, water is released. Condensation reaction, building up reaction. A hydrolysis reaction is a breaking down reaction. So you start out with a polymer, bunch of monomers connected to each other. And in this reaction, water is needed for this reaction to take place. Over here, water was produced in condensation. In hydrolysis, water is needed. It's required for this reaction to happen. The water goes into the reaction. The water gets broken up, actually, because the H sticks to the end of this monomer, and the OH part gets stuck to the end of that monomer. And that's where the water went in the reaction. So in a hydrolysis reaction, we start with a polymer, and you eventually end up with monomers. Water is needed for a hydrolysis. Water is going into the reaction. Okay, over here in a condensation, water is coming out. It's forming as a result of that reaction. Hydrolysis, breaking down, condensation, building up. Carbohydrates. Now, this is the first major organic macromolecule. Macro means big molecules. Carbohydrates Most of us know them as sugars, basically. So, what are the building blocks or the subunits or the monomers of carbohydrates? Well, the monomers are simple sugars, also known as one sugar monosaccharide. Saccharide meaning sugar, mono meaning one. So, a simple sugar or one sugar, a monosaccharide. These are the building blocks of carbohydrates, and these are examples of them: glucose, fructose, and galactose. This is the chemical formula for glucose. And these are all simple sugars here, basically, different versions. All right. Functions. Well, what do sugars do? Well, if I give my children a lot of sugar, they're bouncing off the walls. Instant energy. So monosaccharides or simple sugars are used for instant energy. In plants, animals, when energy is needed, sugar is broken down. Okay. Simple sugars are broken down. Glycogen. This is not a monomer. So this is monomer. Monosaccharide, the monomer carbohydrate, the simple carbohydrate, instant energy. Glycogen is a polysaccharide, which means many sugars connected to each other. When your body, what you do in your body when we eat sugary food, we take the sugar in our food and we store some of it. So we turn it into polysaccharides called glycogen in our bodies. What does this do? Now we have temporary energy storage if we need to use it later. This is why you'll notice, like an athletic team, they might eat a lot of carbohydrates, like a pasta party before a football game, for example, or the night before, so that they're loaded up on this temporary energy storage called glycogen within their body. So glycogen is a polysaccharide, many sugars connected to each other. And this is how our bodies store sugar. And this is not found in plants. They do not store it as glycogen. Plants, they store their sugar as a polysaccharide called starch. So starch is similar to glycogen, but starch is found in plants. Glycogen is found only in animals. Okay? So this is how plants temporarily store energy. Foods that are high in starch have a lot of energy in them. These are the foods they tell you to stay away from if you want to lose weight. Your doctor will tell you to stay away from white food, specifically white bread, white rice, white potatoes. Your doctor will tell you stay away from those foods if you want to lose weight. Beans, they're about half protein, half carbohydrates. Okay, so they have a decent amount of them. Certain nuts have some starch in them. Okay, pasta, a lot of starch in it. Cereals, very starchy. Okay. Corn is another starchy vegetable too. All right. And then finally, cellulose. This is another type of polysaccharide. This one's different. So this is a bunch of sugars, many sugars connected to each other, and they're connected differently than these sugars. These sugars that are connected to each other can build a structure forming the cell wall of a plant or of algae, like seaweed, for example. So polysaccharide, many sugars that make up cell walls. We do not have cellulose in our bodies. We need to eat cellulose in our diet. You know what they call it in our diet? It's called fiber. So when we eat fiber, we are eating plant cell walls called cellulose. All right? Foods that are full of sugar, they end in OSE. This is in almost every ingredient in the store. You ever see high fructose corn syrup? Fructose, they get the sugar from the starchy part of the corn and they break down the starch and they turn it into sugar. Okay? 1 gram of sugar or 1 gram of any carbohydrate, 1 gram of carbohydrates has 4 calories. So if you drink a 100 calorie I'm talking the small cans of soda, a small can of soda, not the 12 ounce, I believe they're 8 ounces. If you drink an 8-ounce soda, it's about 100 calories, and all those calories came from sugar. So how many grams would be in there? Well, if it has 100 calories, 100 divided by 4 gives you 25 grams of sugar in a teeny 8-ounce can of soda. And almost all carbohydrates are hydrophilic, which means what are they going to do? They'll probably dissolve in water eventually. Yeah. Second macromolecule, protein. This is an organic macromolecule called protein. What are proteins made out of? They're made out of these things called amino acids. There's 20 different kinds. You can think of them as building blocks. There's 20 different kind of blocks that you can build proteins out of. So basically, proteins can be built in many shapes and sizes. These are the workers of the cell. People don't think of that. People think of protein as structure mainly, but protein is what enzymes are made out of, and enzymes are the workers of our body. They control how our body's reactions take place and how they work. And how do those enzymes work? For example, like this picture here, well, the proteins, because there's 20 different kinds of amino acids, they have different shapes. These shapes of their active site allows them to do different things. They're like little factories almost. So the building blocks of proteins, amino acids, all right? How do these 20 different amino acids behave? Well, what's special about these different amino acids? Well, they have these different R group or a side chain. All right. So all amino acids, it doesn't matter which amino acid of the 20 you look at, every one of them has an amino group or an amine group attached to it. Every one of them has a carboxylic acid group or carboxyl group attached to it. Okay. Every one of them has this. Every one of them has that. Then they have different side chains. Well, what makes these side chains differently? Well, some of these amino acids have a hydrophilic side chain. Some of them have a hydrophobic side chain. So because they have different side chains, they're almost like Lego pieces of different shapes and different sizes, and they can do different things, and they can behave differently depending on whether they're hydrophilic or whether they're hydrophobic. So the R group determines how they behave, basically, for the most part. What are the functions of proteins? Well, structure, 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 structure. All these are structural things. Physical structure is pretty much protein in our bodies. Our cell membranes have some in there, hair, horn, skin, tendon, ligaments, muscles, and you name it. Structure, structure, structure. It's going to be probably made out of protein in a living thing. Enzymes are proteins, special proteins that speed up and control and regulate chemical reactions, basically. All right. So if you're looking at an enzyme, enzymes are proteins. So what is this enzyme made out of? Not just proteins, it's made out of what? Amino acids. So enzymes are made out of amino acids because enzymes are proteins. It's very important. They control how things work in our body. What can enzymes do? In this picture, I'm showing you a picture of an enzyme doing a hydrolysis reaction. Well, enzymes, they can build or break down. This is just showing you a breaking down reaction. So here's the enzyme. This area here is the active site as being shown you here. So this is the area that performs the work on the enzyme. Okay, so the fancy terms you need to know is this. The thing the enzyme is working on is called the substrate. All right. The area of the enzyme that does the job, does the work, is called the active site. Okay, so think of this substrate. This is an enzyme. This is a digestive enzyme, meaning it's trying to break down food particles that you ate. Okay, if it's a digestive reaction, meaning breaking down, it is a hydrolysis reaction. It's a breaking down reaction. So think of this. This is something we ate. So this would be we ate some starch in our diet. So we have a bunch of sugars connected to each other. Well, we have enzymes called amylase that break down starch into sugars. So what does the enzyme do? The active site attaches to the substrate, and then it breaks down the bonds that are holding it together. And if it's doing that, what kind of reaction? It's doing a hydrolysis reaction. So water was needed for this reaction to take place, and now it's broken apart into its monomers. Okay? Now, proteins, they can be destroyed or disrupted. Fancy word for messing up a protein is called denaturing a protein. If a protein is denatured, it means the protein has been messed up in some way. Something changed the shape. So let me give an example. If this is a protein and we denatured it, if we change the shape of the active site, it will no longer break apart the substrate. Right? So if this active site changes in its shape or form, it's not going to be able to do its job anymore. So we've denatured the protein, basically, is what we're saying. So if you denature it, you changed it in a way where it's not functional anymore. What can do that to a protein? Temperature, hot and cold. Have you guys ever heard of heat stroke? People have heat stroke. That's because their enzymes stop working because it's too hot. Have you ever heard of hypothermia? That's people's enzymes not working because they're too cold. You'll die in both scenarios. If your environment, if something pH changes, if something becomes too acidic or too basic, the shape of the protein will change. It can denature the protein. Salty environments change. Salt is full of charged particles. And remember, some of these amino acids have charged particles. They're hydrophilic and some are hydrophobic. So these charged particles can have an effect on the shape of the protein. Okay? So things that can denature it, temperature, pH, acid or base, or salt. These are denaturing items. Okay? It can change the structure of a protein and make it not functional. Foods that proteins are in, well, here's a whole bunch of them, but these foods also have other organic molecules in them. All right. Dairy, meat, egg whites specifically, beans, but beans also have some starch in them. So there's a mixture of things in here. Now, protein, just like carbohydrates, 1 gram of protein is 4 calories. So if I said to you, you have an item with 20 grams of protein in it, how many calories was it? Well, 4 times 20 would give you 80 calories. What is a peptide bond? Well, so this is a bunch of amino acids. You chain them together, you bond them together. The bond that's holding them together is called a peptide bond. When you have a chain of amino acids together, well, that forms a polypeptide. Many peptide bonds are a chain of amino acids. Then this chain of amino acids folds over itself and turns and has a specific shape because of all those R groups, and then it becomes what's called a protein. So a protein is a functioning polypeptide that now has a 3-dimensional structure. Third organic macromolecule, lipids. Lipids are fancy words for fat. What are they made out of? Fatty acids connected to glycerol. So this is a common fat. This is a triglyceride down here. How do I know it's a triglyceride? 3 fatty acids are connected to it. Okay? So triglyceride, 3 fatty acids connected to a glycerol. That's a fancy word, triglyceride. It's a fancy word for fat. But what are triglycerides used for? Well, our body make these to have long-term energy storage. So I'm talking energy we can use a long time. It's different than glycogen in our bodies. Glycogen is temporary sugar energy storage in our bodies. We could use it. When you go to work out, the first 20 to 30 minutes of your workout, you're using glycogen. You are not burning fat for the first part of your workout. You are burning your stored sugar first. Then, once you've gotten through your stored sugar, your glycogen, then your body will start using fat. Your triglycerides can then be broken down for energy. This is how your body works. Okay. What are lipids used for? They cushion, they insulate vital organs. Okay. Blubber, for example, on a whale, it insulates it, keeps it warm in that cold water. Lipids are also in steroids or cholesterol. They're structural. So you do need to eat lipids in your diet. You need them for certain things. You need them for chemical messages of your body called hormones. Wax, for example, is a waterproofing substance. I've already mentioned it to this earlier. Plants have waxy leaves so that water runs off, so that air, oxygen, and CO2 can get in and out of their leaves. Okay? So this, if water would just stick there, it would block air from getting in and out, and they need air to get in and out of their leaves. So they have wax to get the water to roll right off. Also, a special kind of lipid is called a phospholipid. This is what makes up cell membranes. Okay, so this is called a phospholipid bilayer. The head is called the phospho. The lipid are the 2 tails. So a phospholipid is 1 head, 2 tails makes 1 phospholipid. This is one of the main structural parts of the cell membrane, along with some protein is what the cell membrane is made out of. 2 kinds of fats, saturated and unsaturated. Well, what's the difference? Okay, well, saturated fats, here's a picture of a triglyceride. All right, this triglyceride is 3 fatty acid chains and glycerol. Okay, well, if you notice, these chains are the same. This chain here is a little different. Well, these 2 chains up here are saturated fatty acid chains. What does that mean? They have the maximum number of hydrogens possible. Here's another way of looking at it. They don't have a double bond anywhere in there. If you notice the unsaturated chain, it has a double bonded carbon to carbon here. Because of this double bonding, that double bonding removed some hydrogens. So this double bonding means they have less hydrogens in their chain than they do in the saturated. So unsaturated fatty acids have less hydrogens in them. They're actually Generally speaking, unsaturated fats are usually better for us. Usually, okay? Not always. There's always exceptions to the rule. They're easier to break down in our bodies because of this double bond. If you ever see a fat, and this is like in chips and different snack foods, they have what's called hydrogenated fat in them. That is not healthy for you. Hydrogenated fat means they took healthy fats, like unsaturated fats, and they hydrogenated them. They added hydrogens, which means they made them saturated. Saturated fats are usually solids at room temperature, commonly found in animals. Why do we say they're not always, but they're usually not as good for you? Because these are the kinds, being solids at room temperature, these are the kinds that usually will clog arteries. But I'm telling you, there's exceptions to the rules. There's different kinds of fats. How long their chain is has a factor on how bad they are for you also, in case you didn't know that. So there's more than just it being saturated or unsaturated on whether it's good or bad for you, right? Unsaturated fats, they have more of these double bonds in them, okay? And it kind of creates a kink. They're easier to break down. They're usually liquids at room temperature, and they're commonly found in plants. So unsaturated fats, usually found in plants. Saturated fats are usually found in animals. So unsaturated plant, saturated animal. Fat has more energy in it. Long-term energy storage is the job of fat. So each gram of fat has 9 calories in 1 gram. So if you have 10 grams of fat, you have 10 times 9, you have 90 calories. If you have 10 grams of sugar, 10 times 4, you have 40 calories. If you have 10 grams of protein, 10 times 4, 40 calories. So the same amount of fat would give us 90 calories. The same amount of sugar or protein would give us 40 calories. Now, these lipids, they're nonpolar, they're hydrophobic, they do not dissolve in water. And where are you going to find them? Nuts, meats, dairies, oils, lard is animal fat. They use it for cooking and things of that nature. Okay. And finally, our fourth group of organic macromolecules are nucleic acids. We will not talk about them in a lot of detail. We will have a whole chapter dedicated to DNA, basically. What are nucleic acids made out of? Their building blocks are called nucleotides. So here's a picture showing you one nucleotide. There's another one, there's another one, and there's another one. Okay. The examples of these nucleic acids are deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, or ribonucleic acid, RNA. And what do? These are just general things that they do because we're going to learn about them in a lot more detail. DNA, it's our control center of our cells. And you're going to learn later that DNA has the code. It contains the code for making proteins, and your body needs proteins for structure and for enzymes. And RNA helps facilitate how DNA works. It transfers information from the DNA to the ribosomes, and ribosomes are protein factories because if DNA is the code for making protein, you got to get that information to the protein factory, and those are called ribosomes. We will learn about many other kinds of RNA in another chapter, so I'm not going to go in detail on all these different types of DNA and RNA, okay? And finally, if we just look at this food label, here's a food label here, and this food here, this is a potato. There is 0 grams of fat in a potato. Potatoes are mostly carbohydrates and protein. How many calories did these 3 grams give the potato? Well, what's 3 times 4? That's your answer, 12. 26 here, technically it's a little less because 2 grams of it are fiber, but 26 times 4, just a little bit, 104 calories come from carbohydrates. If you notice, 104 here, okay, 104 plus 12. What's that equal? Well, 116, but it says 110. Well, food labels, they like to round and they do things of that sort. To make their food seem healthier in some cases. But technically, if you know the sugar, carbohydrates, the fat, and the protein in a food item, you can calculate how much the calories will be in that food item. Over here, this I believe is chocolate milk. 2.5 grams of fat, well, 2.5 times 9, that's how many calories you'll get from fat. Over here, carbohydrates, 24 times 4, that's how many calories you'll get from carbohydrates, and 8 times 4, that's how many calories you will get from protein. Fat, don't forget, is 2.5 times 9. Carbohydrates times 4, protein times 4. And we'll stop there.